Let us talk about the extract process. Now, again, in extract process, like I'm going back to the same example. Like we are given the responsibility of designing the product. So when we are designing about, let's take when we design the capture process, right? What is the ideal job of the capture process? Or we are just assuming what it should do. It should, these are our redo logs. I'm not considering the archives. So in redo, whatever transactions are written, and whenever it finds the DML, again, as I said, DDL we'll discuss later. If any DML command is found, capture it. Correct? So this will be captured and pushed onto the target server. This is what we already know about the extract process. But again, there are multiple conditions and multiple types of extract. Do you think you will always use capture to just read from redo and uh, write it onto the source trail? Not really. There are again further scenarios where you will understand what are the types of extracts. Also, as I told you, data pump is also one type of secondary extract. So the job of extract process is to capture the insert, update, delete, nothing but our DMLs. But you can even configure the extract process to capture the DDL changes. So we'll talk about DDL later. Next is capture change via transaction logs. Nothing but our redo or archive logs. Only committed changes are captured. This is very important point. Many people in interview, they confuse candidate by saying that, okay, one guy issued, again same example, one guy issued an update command which ran for 2 hours, and your golden gate replication is also enabled. After that, user issued a rollback. So what will happen onto the target size? This is just a confusing question, but if you look at the scenario, the user never committed the transaction. So Golden Gate will capture only the committed transactions. So what are the types of extract processes? We have three types of extract process. Local extract. It's very simple. Local extract is nothing but a normal extract or capture process that writes into source trail. Once again, normal extract process is the one which captures the transactions and writes into source trail. This is very important point. And again, we have already seen that data pump is also one kind of extract process, but it's a secondary extract. Next is initial load extracts. This is a very typical condition which we all will understand right now. Now assume there is a table, okay? Or let us look at this in this way. Your management asks you to implement Golden Gate, okay? Now assume your source database is being built from the scratch. You are actually building the source database. So what you will have only table structure, right? You will only have table structure, but you won't have any rows, only table structure. In this case, what I can do is on the target also, I can create the table structure same as source, and just I have the table header. That is nothing but column names. In this case, let's take I configure the Golden Gate like this. So what will happen whenever there is an insert in this table, Golden Gate will replicate it over here also, right? So if there is an insert, update, delete, whatever commands are run, the insert, update, deletes will be captured onto this new destination. But the problem starts, I mean, it's very unfortunate, or maybe if you get this kind of situation, then good, when you have completely new servers where you need to configure the replication. But that case never happens in real time because you configure Golden Gate on the database which contains the table which already has data. I repeat, you will always encounter this situation that you need to configure replication on the source where you already have rows. Now, what can be done in this case? Because it's a simple scenario, right? See, Golden Gate will capture only insert, update, delete. But when you have, let's take this table is having 20 rows, just an example. 20 rows, and I'm asked to configure the golden gate. So if I want a real-time replication, before even I can configure the golden gate, I should have these 20 rows on the target also, right? That is when both the targets, both the databases or both these tables will be in sync. Next, going forward, whenever there is an insert, update, delete, it will be an identical copy. So this thing, or this process of getting the already existing rows from source to target is known as initial load. Okay, I repeat, this process where your source is already having the rows or already having data in the table, you need to fetch that data from the source to target, right? And this entire process is called as initial load. This is not replication. Replication is insert, update, delete, and that is pushed onto the target server. Okay, insert, update, delete. If anything happens on source, that is pushed onto the target. But if the table is already containing rows, then I need those rows over here, right? Otherwise tables will not be in sync. So this process is known as initial load. Very important term, and this is what we are also going to do in our course. Okay, now we got this idea about what is initial load. So okay, let us assume these 20 rows are there. I want these 20 rows over here. How can I get it? Simple. I can export and import, right? If I'm using both source and target as Oracle. Simple as that. But the change or the challenge would be when both are not same. Then you again need to use a third party utility to get those already existing data in the tables onto the target server. In this case, Golden Gate will help you. You don't need to purchase any third party product in order to perform the initial load. So you can configure an extract separately in Golden Gate that will help you to perform an initial load, and then you configure a local extract in order to continue with the replication. Okay. So I hope this is clear, but once again, I'll repeat the things. In general, when you configure Golden Gate, you you are you are very unlike to get a environment where only blank tables are there, and then they will ask you to configure Golden Gate until it's a new environment. But if you are configuring it on an existing environment, source will definitely contain tables which is having already data. So before you set replication, you need this data onto the target site as well, right? So this process of getting the data from source to target is known as initial load. So what we do is in initial load, we make the tables as exact copy and then enable replication. That's when we can say that these are true copy of each other. If there is no initial load and if you are performing only insert, update, deletes, then definitely both the tables will not be in sync, right? So for this purpose, we also have a special type of extract which is known as initial load extract. Some people, I have seen this one. Some people, what they do is they overlook the initial load extract when the source and target are both Oracle. They actually use export import utility, because after export import, definitely source and target are same, and then they can directly enable the normal replication. So normal replication is enabled using the local extracts. There is a note: source and target databases need to have same structure for setting up replication. Okay, so when we say about same structure, again this is limited to a situation. Now when we talk about structure, it should be like okay, understand okay, I'm just thinking of what example to give. So we have this source table and we have this target table. The columns that you plan to map, okay, the columns that you plan to map, at least, because you can even choose that. So at least you should have the same structure in those scenarios. That means whatever the source table structure is, it should be same in the target. But honestly, I think I should remove that point over here, because in a heterogeneous environment, uh, if you define like the columns in a different data type on source, because every vendor will have its own data types, right? So maybe in Oracle, if we call it as number, it might not be exactly number in the others. Maybe it can be integer, right? So in this kind of cases, I think we should remove this point. Does not make that much sense. Okay. So about the extracts, once again, we'll talk about the extracts. Extracts will capture, insert, update, delete. You can even configure for DDL changes, like you alter the table and modify the table. Those kind of changes also we can capture. I mean, changes are captured via the transaction logs. Only committed transactions are captured, and there are three types of extract process. One is local extract that will read from the transactions and write it onto the source trail. Next is a data pump extract that will read from the source trail files. Okay, I'll open it. So data pump will read from the source trail files, push it onto the target server. Again, data pump is also one type of extract process. And then we have a special type of extract that is known as initial load extract that will read from the source table the existing data and push it onto the target database. So guys, any doubts till now? We have some.
Aaron, this is Suman.
Yeah, hi Suman, tell me.
Yeah, what is the main significance of data pump extract? What is the main difference between local extract and data pump extract? On which case data pump is needed?
Every case, we in the further slides you will understand. Data pump is for sending data. Extract is for getting data from the source. That's the best difference, I believe.
Oh, just for sending the data. Okay.
Yeah. So is the pump process mandatory to have in Golden Gate? No, but it is highly recommended. We are about to see that point. So pump process is not mandatory, but it is very highly recommended. I mean, I'll talk about the scenario that what can go wrong if you don't have pump process. Okay. What about using when index rebuild is going on, when Golden Gate is configured, how it works? Okay, that's a good question. I'll talk about this when we are dealing with the Golden Gate performance. I mean, we have a topic on this. And then the source may be prod. Then in that case, how you establish initial load extracts. So I'm just thinking, like, what's the problem that why can't we um, make prod as the source? If there is any server performance issues, then what you can do is, if you have a data guard setup, that is known as downstream extract. I think these all questions will be answered during the slide, so I will ignore these questions, some of them. And the how it's possible to do the initial load. A good question. You will understand this one. Okay, guys, I'll be very frank with you. I will not explain the questions bits and pieces if they are about to be answered in the course. Okay, so just, I mean, I'll just overlook the questions. See, this heterogeneous environment, how is it possible to perform initial load? When we are doing the project, you will understand, because in the project we are dealing with two different types of vendors. Can we have multiple extracts and during the initial load? Generally not. It is not preferred to have multiple, but I mean, 99% of the time people will go with only one. You will understand why in some time when I'll be discussing the problems of DML and DDL captures. You will understand what is the problem of having multiple extracts, and when to have multiple extracts, when to not have multiple extracts, when to have multiple replicates, when to not have multiple replicates. There are again pros and cons, con for all these steps. Okay, so because the source is 1 TB. Yeah, who's this?
Aaron, this is Suman.
Yeah, someone tell me.
Yeah, just I want to know, are you going to cover Golden Gate patching in the future sessions?
I think we have. a topic like patching in Golden Gate. Yes, we do have that topic.
Yeah,
We'll
okay,
be
fine. Yeah.
looking at. That is something again. If the database is 1 TB, I would recommend you to perform an Armin clone. I mean, again, it depends what is your requirement. So go with Armin clone, get the source backups, perform a clone, and then perform the replication on the tables you want. So yes, there are some shortcuts also to get the things done. And if the source is db2, I'm sorry guys, I'm not aware of db2. Most of the times if you ask me questions about db2 or any other database which is supported by golden gate, which I have not worked, maybe I can only give you an idea as per my experience, but I may not be very good at the other things, because one guy cannot learn all the vendors which are supported by golden gate, right? So regarding DB2, I think you need to check with further. Even I don't know whether there is a possibility of any integration that you can combine DB2 with Oracle. Okay, so for DB2, I would request you to research a little bit. I'm not sure about it. Yeah, maybe even I can try with my friends when I'm if I get this doubt. Yeah, let's continue. Golden Gate data pump process.
Yeah, Arun,
Yeah,
here, Arun, this is Pankaj.
yeah, Pankaj, tell me.
Yeah. So, Arun, one question here. Is it mandatory to have at least Oracle database, either a source or target,
No, no, no,
or can we
no,
do?
no, no, not mandatory. It's a heterogeneous player means if you want to set up replication into source and target, you can choose the other vendors also. But honestly, because I'm an Oracle DBA primarily, so that's the reason I'm at least choosing source or the target as the Oracle, even in the
Okay,
what do you call the projects? Yeah. But I
okay,
guess, guys, because we all are experienced people, will pick up the things when we know how to manage the Golden Gate processes, because that will be same in any scenario, whether it is Oracle database or any other database. Yeah,
okay.
right. So next we have is data pump process. As I mentioned earlier, it's a type of secondary extract process. Many a times, if you talk to old people, okay, old I means the people who are working on Golden Gate for a long time, they also sometimes will say that, you know what, I need to configure an extract which will send data from this server to this server. So you don't have to get confused. They just mean they want to configure a data pump process. So data pump is many a times, some people call it as secondary extract, or they'll just use extract process as well, but don't get confused over there. Okay, so it's a type of secondary extract process. Yes, it's a type of secondary extract process, but there is a point. It is optional process, but highly recommended. Now again, one more question arises over here. Fine, if this process is optional, let us assume we have source and target. Extract ext will write into source trails, right? There is no pump process that can send the source trail onto the network. Over here we have collector process, then remote trails, then we have replicat process. The transactions will be applied. Now the question is, if we say that data pump is optional, so the question is who will send the data onto the target? You know what, in the extracts, you can even configure an extract which will directly send the data onto the target. This is also possible. But there are pros and cons of using this kind of extract. There are a lot of issues. I mean, trust me, you can entirely collapse your environment with this kind of setup. Don't use, this is out of experience I'm saying, don't use extracts to directly send the data onto the target. Yes, it is possible to configure an extract that is writing to source trail and that is also sending data onto the target. So this situation arises when you don't want to use data pump. Once again, I repeat, if you're not using data pump process, you can configure secondary extracts which can write into source trail and also send the data onto the target server. But do not use this configuration. I'm warning you guys, do not use this configuration. Don't even practice also. It is just waste of time. Nobody uses it in real time. Okay, don't even practice it. And I have seen a lot of courses online or a lot of tutorials online where I don't know why they just skip the data pump process in order to simplify the training. But there's no point in training someone in a wrong way, which is not used in real time. So don't practice this also. If you get a chance also, don't try to Google or use it. In case if you want to have some extra knowledge, maybe you can just read about it, but don't try to configure this thing. I'll tell you what's the problem in some time. So this data pump is optional, but it is highly recommended. So why it is highly recommended, we'll understand in some time. So data pump is a type of secondary extract process, reads from trail files and sends them over network. That's the simple job of data pump process. It will it will read from the source trail and send it over to the target server. In case of network issues, data pump waits until network is established and starts sending trails to target again. Okay, we have this point here only. Great. Now coming back to the same scenario, why I recommend not to use this kind of extract. Let us assume this extract is there, right? There are two jobs of this extract. One is to first write into the source file. This is the first job. Second job is this extract itself will read from the source and then send it on to the target. Okay, this is the job of the extract process, right? Now, okay, this is a situation when we are not configuring the data pump. Okay, so this extract, assume there is a network issue. You know what happens? It will not write into source trails. So you will not get any source trail, but your database will continue to execute or continue to run. In this situation, what will happen? If source trail are not generated, after the network is established, then you have missing transactions. Some transactions are missing because source trail were never generated. This is the main reason why it is highly recommended to have a dedicated data pump process. Okay. Now, what is the benefit of having data pump process? Let us assume there was some network issue. Okay, network was not working. Data pump went down. But this does not affect the extract. Extract will continue to create the source trail files. Once the network comes back, yeah, hi, who's this? So once the network comes back, what happens is data pump is initiated and it will read from all these trails which are generated. The transactions are transferred onto the target. So this is why data pump is highly recommended. If you are not using data pump, you can use an extract or configure an extract that pushes transactions onto the target. But if you have any issues with the network connectivity or any problems in reaching the target server, your source trails will not be generated. So that's the reason it is highly recommended. And this is why I say that you don't even need to learn it, because nobody will use such a feature. In the data pump process, we can even filter and transform the data. Let's take you want to filter the data based on some condition, or you want to change the date format, or anything you want to do some changes before you apply it onto the target, then it is good to do it with the data pump process. Now, one more question arises. The question is, why are we doing data changes and transformation using data pump process? Why? Because we have a transaction. This transaction has impacted maybe 20 rows. Just some random example. Now, these 20 rows are captured by your extract process. Okay, extract creates source trails. Source trails are read by data pump. Data pump will send it over the network. Now understand, you have a condition or maybe filter or maybe transformation on the data. Now, when this filter condition transformation is applied onto this 20 rows, 10 rows have been removed, and 10 rows actually satisfy the condition filter or transformation. Now, the benefit of having the conversion or the data transformation with the data pump is you send less data on the network. This is again a part of improving the performance of Golden Gate, right? So, so once again, the benefit of data pump process and configuring condition filter or transformation setup with the data pump is it might, okay, it might or might not, it might reduce the number of rows because some might not satisfy the condition, and that way you send only the filtered data over the network, which will actually reduce the network usage. So if you have less traffic, definitely you will see a good performance in the network as well, right? So this is the reason data pump, any filtration, any data transformation that you want to do it with the data pump process. Now we have one more scenario: configure multiple data pumps in one-to-many replications so that when one target gets down, only corresponding data pump is affected. This again relates back to our problem number one. What was the problem number one? I don't want to use data pump process. What will happen? Let us understand we are using a broadcast replication. We are broadcasting some data onto multiple servers. Okay. So what is the job of extract? It will read the data, put it into source trails. Okay. Now assume, we are just assuming we or okay, no need to assume actually. So next we have the data pump process. Now because we have three targets, right? I can configure one data pump which is pushing the data onto multiple targets. I don't think this is possible because I never tried it. Maybe it might be possible, but it is not recommended. Why it is not recommended? Because if any target is not reachable, even the others will be affected. Might happen. So what is the benefit? You configure the multiple data pumps because you have three target servers, right? This is 1, 2, and 3. So the first data pump will push the data onto the first target, second will push on second, third will push on to the third. Understand, if one target is down, only this data pump will be affected. These two will happily continue with the replication. So in some cases, you need to configure multiple data pump process. This generally happens into the broadcast replication. It's really bad. I'm talking about the cost. So once again, data pump process very clear. See, extract job is to extract the data, push it onto the source trail. We also have an initial load extract. And then what is the data pump? It is an optional process but highly recommended. Why it is highly recommended? This is very important interview question, guys. If we do not configure the data pump, and if we configure an extract which is sending data onto the target site, and if there is any network issue, the source trails will not be generated. That's the reason data pump waits for the network to establish and then continue sending the source trails. Also, you must use filter and transformation on the data pump process so that you reduce the amount of data that travels over the network. Okay, good question. We have one question. This is a nice question. Is data pump is necessary in the initial load? No. There is no data pump process at all in initial load. Don't mind. I mean, you will get a lot of clarity when we ourselves are doing the initial load. So data pump is not there in initial load. I mean, I'll revisit the architecture when we are talking about the initial load. Don't worry. So we have source trail files generated as trace files. No, these are not the trace files of Oracle database. These are the Golden Gate files. So that's why it is known as source trail. That is a name and term used by the Golden Gate software. So those are the files that belongs to Golden Gate, not to Oracle database. So these are not the trace files. So we have one question: data filtering done at data pump level, right? Yes. And I have shown you a benefit, but you know what? You can even have data filtration at the replicat level. So when the replicate process is about to write the transaction onto the target, then also you can filter the data. But what's the problem? Again, as I mentioned, let's take on the source, we have 20 rows affected and 20 are traveled on the network. Over here, 20 have received. I mean, we got 20 records. And then when we are filtering, the output is 10 rows that will be affected over here. So the extra 10 which has traveled on the network, it's all waste, right? Wastage of resources. So that's the reason it is always recommended to use the filtration conditions in the data pump process itself. Sometimes it might reduce the records. Otherwise, if all the records are going, then that is something that will continue. How the condition established between source and target? Okay. I think it's very early to talk about how the conditions are set in Golden Gate. Once the, and what is the condition?
Hi Arun, Nikhil here.
Yeah, hi Nikhil, tell me.
Yeah, right. I have a question. We see two scenarios here. One, when we configured data pump process that actually transmitting the trace files, and another
Okay, and
where
not,
we are not
it's not trace
configuring the,
files. I'm sorry to interrupt
I
you.
mean, trail
Trail.
files. Yeah,
Yes,
trail
yes.
files. Sorry.
Yeah.
And other scenario was we didn't configure the data pump process and extract process itself transmitting the trail files, right?
Correct. Yes, yes.
So my question is, for the case where data pump is not configured,
Hmm.
extract process is transmitting. In that case as well, extract process is using the trail files,
Yes.
or
First,
it is directly sending the data.
no, no, no. First job is to write into source trail. Second job is to send the data. It is
Okay, okay,
sequential. Without source trail, it will not send the data. So, but again, as I
okay,
mentioned,
fine.
guys, no need to learn it. You will just waste your time. Yeah. So data pump is
Thanks.
mandatory. We are also going with that one. I'm not going to deviate from something which is like not used in real time. There's no point in discussing about it.
Hel- Hello, Arun.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Tell me. Yeah.
Uh, once the data is transferred to the target DB,
Mhm.
what is the situation at source trail files? Is it the data is still in the source trail file, or it's moved from source trail
No,
files?
it will be there. The trail files are normal like your archives that are generated. So like how archives are generated, same way trail files are generated one by one. Again, we need management to delete the source trails. Those are again comes into administration part. We'll understand about how to delete the old traces. I'm sorry, trail files. So I don't know who asked this question about the trace files. That is now coming up to me as well. Sorry, it's not trace, it's trail files. Okay, once the data transfer, then what is the condition of source file? I mean, its answer. How many processes are mandated to configure coordinate source and target if we are using unidirectional? See, this is very simple, right? Every process, minimum one process you need to configure. So how many processes are mandatory to configure? Basically, you need at least one, right? More than one is depends on the situation, but one is minimum. You need to have at least one process. If you don't configure extract, how your replication will work? If you don't configure the replicate, how data will be applied? So minimum you need each process one quantity. Okay, that was a wrong relation, but it's okay. Right, guys? So I mean, I'm just understanding. I missed adding the mm, extract which actually directly transfers the data from source to target, because as I mentioned, you don't need to learn it. Don't focus on it. Out of the scenario I have told you guys just for your information. But again, I would recommend, because this is an architecture video, it's my personal recommendation to all, please 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 go through this video at least 3-4 times. If your foundation is amazing, you can actually I mean, it will be very easy for you to talk in interviews. So don't look at the and look at learning the commands or remembering the commands. Um, when I personally take some interviews, I never ask for commands. I need the knowledge. I need the workflow. I need, do you really understand what will be the impact of what you are saying? So those are the things which I personally look at, and I hope most of the interviewers will also look at those things. So you just cannot say something where you yourself don't know what would be the impact if you do like that. Okay, so that's why architecture, please make it pretty solid. Okay, next is Golden Gate collector process. This is a very simple process. First thing, no need to configure. We do not configure collector process. I repeat, we do not configure the collector process. It auto starts whenever data is coming from the primary or maybe the source database. Now you will have another question. Come on, how will it be automatically started? I will go back to the manager process. Okay, this is something we are about to learn. We have two manager processes on source and target. What is the job of manager? To maintain the port information 8800, right? We have two manager processes running on different servers on different ports. When data pump sends the data, it will definitely send it onto this port. On this port, by default, your collector will run. So this collector is auto started. Okay, and you don't configure it, you don't define any parameter, you don't do anything with the collector. It is auto start. So this, but this needs manager to be up and running. If your manager is down, definitely collector will not work. So that's the reason, I mean, we will talk about manager separately. So collector process will auto start on this port, which is defined inside the manager. It is not defined onto the collector. Whenever data pump is sending the data, collector is started on the target server. It will read the incoming data and writes onto the target trails or remote trail, whatever we call. Okay, can we have same port for manager process? I think too early to answer. Just wait for the topic. Yeah. So what is the collector process? Runs on the target system. It actually runs on the target system, receives trails from the data pump, writes them locally onto the remote trail. When we say locally, it is on the target system because collector runs on the target system. It's a background process and does not need to configure. You don't configure it, it is started automatically. Oh, so you guys are feeling okay, one headache is gone. This is not required to configure. Yes, it is not needed to configure. Now let's talk about the Replicat process. Okay, so yes, again, how we have extract data pump collector. Replicat also has some properties. First one is it is also called as delivery process. If you hear delivery process, apply process, Replicat, all are one and the same. The job of Replicat process is it reads from the trails on the target system and then apply changes onto the target database. Also, changes happens in the same order as they were committed on the source system. The way you commit the data, the same way changes are applied onto the target system. Again, when we are dealing with the improvement of performance or actually the performance tuning of Golden Gate, that time you will understand a few scenarios in this zone, like what is the problem having multiple replicats and how to resolve the change, the conflicts in the data. I think too early to talk about it. So changes as they happen in the source, the same order they are applied onto the target. Now there are two types of Replicat process. Initial load Replicat. Again, we got the same term, right? Initial load. So what happens in initial load? We all know that we have some tables which are already having some data. And I have a blank table on the target system. Only I have the structure of the table. I don't have the rows. So before I can set the replication, I need to capture this data, insert all those rows over here, right? So this is initial load, and then we enable the replication, correct? So this in initial load, we have initial load extract. The same way, we also have initial load replicat. Only for initial load, these two processes are exclusively configured. Once the job is done, you can remove the initial load extract, you can remove the initial load replicat, you can configure normal local extract, you can configure a data pump, collector, no need to configure, and then Replicat. So this will continue your replication. So only for initial load, we have two new processes, that is initial load extract and initial load Replicat. These two we are going to see it because we'll be also performing an initial load replication. Okay, so the same way, the way we have initial load extract, we also have initial load Replicat. The next one is the normal Replicat, which will actually read from your target trail files. This is a normal Replicat, which is just reading from the target trail and applying it onto the target database. Okay, so this is a normal Replicat. Otherwise, we also have initial load Replicat, which directly speaks with initial load extract. So in initial load extract, generally we don't configure the data pump. We just connect the initial load extract with initial load Replicat, and then things will continue. Again, guys, a lot of things, because to be very frank, there are a lot of concepts in Golden Gate. Depending on the topic we are in, I will not deviate to a much degree, because right now I cannot talk about initial load more because we are discussing about the architecture, and we already have a dedicated session for it. So some topics, if I really restrict on explaining now, just understand it might be answered in the upcoming lessons, or I will definitely cover up it somewhere while explaining the things. Okay, so the topic is not about the initial load, so I'm just avoiding it. Just understand two types of Replicat. One is initial load and another one is change sync Replicat. Next is you can filter and transform data using Replicat as well, but I showed you one great example where we have seen some performance impact if we do this kind of scenario. So to reduce the network load, what we can do, we can use the filtering and transformation at the data pump level. So that way only less data will travel onto the network. Great, guys. Do we need to stop the transactions and source during initial load extract? There is again theory involved. As I mentioned, we will not discuss about initial load right now. When we are in that topic, you will understand that. And can we have same port for manager process? Yes, we can have same, or we can have different also. How many processes are mandatory? Okay, this is answered. Okay, do we? All right. So more on initial load when you are discussing about initial load. Let's not completely get into initial load. Right now, our goal is to understand the architecture. Trail files. These are not the trace files. These are Golden Gate files. All committed transactions are written to these files. Trail files are sent over network from source to target. Basically, two types of trail files. One will be on the source server. Another one would be onto the remote server. This is pretty straightforward.